She could hear them coming down the corridor. Catherine Howard stood in the tower chamber and practiced kneeling. She had asked for this. One night, one chance to rehearse her own death. The guards had agreed, perhaps out of pity, perhaps because it cost them nothing. She knelt and rose, positioning her neck just so, making certain her movements would be graceful. She was 19 years old. The executioner's block waited at Tower Green, but Catherine had already learned what it meant to have no control over her own body. That lesson had begun years before any crown touched her head. Her childhood had been one of neglect dressed as nobility. The Howards were an old family, ambitious and numerous. Catherine's father possessed a title but little else. Her mother died when Catherine was young. She was sent to live in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, in a sprawling manner where dozens of young women slept in a single dormitory where the old woman rarely looked, and where the night belonged to whoever was bold enough to claim it. Catherine was 10 when she arrived, perhaps 11. Record-keeping was not a priority for unwanted daughters. The dormitory was chaos after dark. Young women and men moved between rooms. Doors opened and closed. There were no chaperones, no locked gates, no one who cared enough to maintain order. The Dowager Duchess was old and indifferent. The structure of supervision existed on paper only. Henry Mannix arrived when Catherine was 12. He was her music teacher, an adult man hired to instruct her in the virginals. He was charming, attentive, and he understood that no one was watching. The lessons extended beyond music. He touched her during practice. He came to the dormitory at night. Catherine did not refuse him, but refusal was not a concept she had been taught she could claim. She was a child in a household that had stopped protecting her long before he arrived. When she was 13, perhaps 14, Francis Derham appeared. He was older, connected to the family. He moved through the dormitory as if he owned it. He called Catherine his wife. The other young women whispered that they were engaged, that promises had been made. Derham entered her bed openly. He brought gifts. He was possessive and visible, and still, no one intervened. Catherine may have believed him. She may have thought herself promised to him in some binding way that history no longer recognizes. The law of the time was unclear on such matters. A promise made in private, consummated in secret. Did it count? Could it? Years later, when her life depended on the answer, no one could agree. In 1539, the Duke of Norfolk noticed his niece, not because he cared for her, but because he recognized an opportunity. King Henry V had just ended his marriage to Anne of Cleves. The king was aging, unwell, and hungry for youth. The Duke needed influence. Catherine was young, pretty, and pliable. She was placed at court. Henry saw her and wanted her immediately. She was not learned like Anne Boleyn. She could not speak multiple languages or debate theology. She was a teenager who smiled when he looked at her, and that was enough. They married in the summer of 1540. Catherine became Queen of England. She was 17, perhaps 16. Henry was 49, obese, and rotting from a leg wound that never healed. His body smelled. His temper was volcanic. He called her his rose without a thorn. She wore gowns that cost more than her father earned in a lifetime. She presided over banquets. She smiled for the court. And late at night, the king came to her chambers and demanded her attention, her affection, her body. She had no choice in this either. Catherine did not ask for Francis Derham to return. But someone, perhaps the Duke, perhaps Derham himself, arranged for him to join her household as her private secretary. He appeared at court. He resumed his old familiarity. He reminded her in small ways that he remembered what they had been. And then Thomas Culpeper entered her life. He was a gentleman of the king's privy chamber, young, handsome, favored by Henry. The king trusted him. Catherine saw him often. They began meeting in private. She sent him gifts. He sent letters. The meetings grew frequent, secretive. Whether Catherine loved him or simply reached for something that felt like choice, we cannot know. But the meetings happened. Late at night, in private rooms, with Lady Rochford standing guard at the door. Catherine was not careful. She was 19 years old, trapped in a marriage to a man whose body repulsed her, whose power terrified her. Culpeper made her feel seen. So she kept meeting him. History has debated endlessly whether the relationship was ever consummated. It does not matter. Henry it was. Belief was all he needed. The arrest came in November 1541. Someone spoke. Perhaps a servant, perhaps a rival, perhaps someone who had been in that dormitory years before and remembered Manox, remembered Dereham. The accusations were brought to the king's council. Henry raged. He wept. He ordered his sword so he could kill Catherine himself. He did not kill her. He had her arrested. Catherine was questioned for hours. She confessed to Manox. She confessed to Dereham. She claimed she had been coerced, manipulated, abused. She begged for the king's mercy. She called herself his loyal wife. She said she had been a child when those things happened, that she had not understood what was being done to her. Her words did not matter. The law did not see her as a victim. It saw her as a woman who had hidden her sexual past from the king. That was treason. The meetings with Culpeper, no matter how chaste, were treason. She had endangered the royal succession. She had dishonored the crown. On February 10, 1542, Parliament passed a bill of attainder against her. She was never given a trial. She was condemned by law, not by jury. They brought her to the Tower on February 10th. She was calm by then. The hysteria of the early days had faded into something quieter, something colder. She asked to see the block. She asked to practice. She spent her final night rehearsing her own execution. On the morning of February 13, 1542, Catherine Howard was led to the scaffold at Tower Green. She was 19 years old. She had been queen for 16 months. She was too weak to speak at length. She asked for prayers. She knelt. The executioner was skilled. It was over quickly. Her body was buried in the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula, near Anne Boleyn, near all the others Henry had destroyed. Francis Dereham was also executed. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered. Thomas Culpeper was beheaded. Lady Rochford, who had enabled the meetings, was executed alongside Catherine. Henry Manox, the music teacher who had abused a 12-year-old child, was never charged. The Duke of Norfolk, who had placed his niece in the king's bed knowing she was unprepared and unprotected, was imprisoned briefly. He was released. He survived. Henry VIII married again. His sixth wife, Catherine Parr, outlived him. History remembers Catherine Howard as foolish, as careless, as a girl who played with fire and deserved to burn. It rarely remembers the men who lit the match. It does not often ask what happens to a child raised without protection, married to absolute power, and punished for trying to survive it. Catherine Howard died on a cold February morning, but the machinery that killed her had been running for years. No one stopped it. No one tried.